3 words on a handwritten tag. Salvage. 300. The tag was taped to a broken windshield on a McLaren that had cost more than $230,000 the day it left the factory. Nobody in the loading bay looked at it twice. The man who had just signed it away did not look at it at all. Trevor Lang stood in the middle of the service wing, with a phone already rising toward his ear. He had spoken 6 words to the man in front of him and was finished with the conversation before the man could answer. "You are a mechanic, Cross. You are not an evaluator." Lang turned and walked toward the elevator the way people walk past furniture. 12 feet behind him, on a flatbed, the wrecked McLaren sat under the fluorescent lights, its front end folded inward and its violet paint still catching the cold morning glow. At the far end of the bay, a boy of 8 sat on an overturned crate with a small toy car held in both hands. The toy was painted the exact same purple as the wreck. He was watching his father. He was not watching Lang. The man in the oil-stained jacket said nothing. He slid his torque wrench into his left breast pocket. He looked at the car. He did not look at Lang. He already knew. Lang did not. His name was Daniel Cross. He was 32 years old and he had worked at Hawthorne Auto Group for 9 years. His apartment in Atlanta was small. Not poverty small. Small the way things become when a man has decided what he is willing to carry and concluded that most of it is not worth the wait. The kitchen counter held exactly 2 mugs. The bookshelf held service manuals, not novels. There was a photograph on the refrigerator and a note beside it in careful, compact handwriting. The note said only what it needed to say. Back by 7. Don't forget your milk. The boy was Eli Cross. He was 8 years old and he carried a small die-cast car everywhere he went. The car had not come painted that color. Daniel had repainted it one Sunday evening at the kitchen table, mixing the violet by hand under a desk lamp, because no color that came in a bottle was exactly right. Eli had watched the whole process without speaking. When it dried, he had held it up to the light and turned it slowly and said it was perfect. He did not consider a different one after that. Some things, he had explained to his father once, you keep. Daniel had agreed without adding anything. He was good at that. 4 years earlier, Eli's mother had died on a wet road outside the city. Her name was Hannah. Daniel had raised the boy alone since then. He had chosen work with fixed hours and an early end so he could be at the school gate when it mattered. He listened to engines the way other people listened to music. That was a thing the building knew about him and had never once written down. Before I tell you what happened the night that engine started again, tell me where you are listening from today, and tell me whether anyone in your life was ever written off before someone bothered to learn who they really were. Drop it in the comments. Stay with me until the end. Hawthorne Auto Group was the largest high-end vehicle auction operation on the East Coast. Its headquarters in Atlanta ran 3 stories of steel and glass over a floor of polished concrete. In any given week, the cars moving through its bays were worth more money than most people would see across an entire working life. The whole organization moved with the measured confidence of a company that had rarely been seriously wrong about what something was worth. Daniel Cross had spent 9 years being the quiet reason that confidence was occasionally justified. He held no college degree, he held no management title and no corner office. What he held was a particular kind of intelligence, the kind that lives in the hands as much as in the mind. In 9 years, he had personally overseen the technical evaluation and restoration path of more than 50 damaged luxury and exotic vehicles. He could walk a car once, crouch at the rocker panel, close his eyes, and tell you within 2 minutes what was broken and what the fastest, honest path to fixing it looked like. From the outside, he was exactly what his badge said he was, a contract technician on the lower floor. The badge did not say anything about how good he was. It was the most accurate document in the building, and the least complete one. His reports were meticulous and consistently right, but his reports were not final. Final authority over pricing and classification belonged to one man. Trevor Lang was 44 years old and Hawthorne's chief operating officer. He occupied his office the way certain men occupy any room, as though everything around them existed to confirm their standing. In the 2 months before the McLaren arrived, Daniel had filed 2 written recommendations to revise the floor values upward on cars he had judged structurally recoverable. Both were rejected. No explanation, no meeting, not even a reply. Walter Briggs found him in the bay after the second rejection. Walter was 57, a senior appraiser who had been in the trade since before Daniel was born, and he was 4 months away from a retirement he had been counting toward for years. He kept his voice low and careful. The cars being undervalued were not staying in the system long, and when they moved, they kept moving to the same small group of names. That observation settled in Daniel's chest like a stone, dropped into still water, quiet, impossible to ignore. What none of them knew yet was how much further it went than a few bad prices. But Daniel had spent 9 years learning to trust the thing in the back of his mind that noticed patterns before he could name them. He noticed this one. He said nothing. He waited. The truck arrived on a Tuesday earlier than the scheduled window. Daniel heard the hydraulic groan of the ramp before he saw the car. He set down his wrench and walked to the bay door. What came off the ramp was a McLaren 720S, Spider finished in a deep metallic violet. It was a color produced only through McLaren's Special Operations Division, made to individual specification, and issued in genuinely small numbers. Anyone who had spent serious time near the brand could identify it on sight. The car had been extraordinary once. That remained visible even now, with the front end collapsed inward, the left door buckled along its lower seam, the windshield gone, and the hood folded toward the firewall at the precise angle of something that had absorbed a direct, high-speed frontal impact. The crew unloaded it without ceremony. One of them photographed it on his phone and sent it to a group chat. Another looked at it, shook his head, and walked off without breaking stride. The flatbed driver signed his release and was back on the highway before the dust settled over the lot. Daniel walked over slowly. He did not hurry. He crouched at the rear of the car first, where almost nothing had been touched. Then he moved along the driver's side and studied the buckled door from 3 separate angles. Then he lowered himself as close to the concrete as the bay allowed and aimed his small flashlight through the gap between the crumpled crash structure and the forward edge of the carbon monocoque. The monocoque was the structural spine of the car. Everything else was assembled around it. He held the light steady for nearly 2 minutes. When he stood, the fundamental assessment was complete. The monocoque was intact, no fracture lines, no delamination at the visible edges, no sign of the catastrophic failure that would have made real recovery impossible. The engine, the 4-liter twin-turbocharged V8 mounted behind the cabin, had not burned, had not taken a direct load, and was physically present and complete in every way he could verify from the outside. Walter Briggs appeared at his left shoulder without announcing himself. The two of them stood in shared silence for a moment. Walter noted the intact frame number and the airbag pattern, which was consistent with a frontal impact and not a rollover. Daniel asked who had brought it in. Walter said the transfer documents listed Anchor Point Insurance Partners out of Savannah as the originating party. No direct contact from the registered owner. No police report attached. Only a damage assessment classifying the car as a total loss. Daniel asked to see the complete paperwork. He read it 3 times. There was a damage report, a salvage classification, a chain of custody form, and in the field where the registered owner was required to sign, confirming voluntary surrender of the vehicle, the line was blank. It was a small omission, the kind that passes without notice in a routine stack unless you are looking for it. He photographed every page with his own phone. Then he photographed the car from different angles. Then he entered the identification number into the company system. Registered owner, Margaret Doyle, Atlanta, Georgia. Owner contact confirmation, blank. He looked at the screen. He looked at the car. Something that had been a question rearranged itself into a certainty. Daniel stayed past 9 that night, preparing the formal assessment he was required to file before any salvage vehicle valued above $40,000 could move to classification. Under Hawthorne's own written rules, a 72-hour evaluation window applied. He documented the intact monocoque, the undamaged drivetrain, the recoverable bodywork, the airbag restoration requirements, and the realistic sourcing path for every damaged section. His conclusion was unambiguous. This vehicle was not a commercial total loss. Restoration to market grade was achievable within a defined cost range. Conservative post-restoration value, $165,000 to $185,000. Recommended auction floor no less than $95,000. He filed it, logged out, and drove home. The next morning the car was gone. Daniel stood on the empty patch of concrete where it had been and looked at it for a long moment. Then he found the warehouse supervisor and asked, very quietly, what had happened. Processed early. Orders from Mr. Lang. He went to the transaction system. The entry was timestamped at 5:48 that morning before the building was officially open. Sold. 300. Buyer, Crestline Salvage LLC. He read it twice. Then he took the elevator to the third floor without rehearsing anything, because the thing he was going to say had already arranged itself. Lang looked up from his desk with an expression that was practiced and flat. Not surprise, not quite contempt. The controlled version of both that a man develops when he has anticipated a confrontation and decided in advance how little it will weigh. Daniel placed his phone on the desk, face up, photographs visible. He presented the assessment in precise terms. What the car was, what its structure proved, what the recovery path looked like, what the real valuation range was. He kept his voice level. He was not making an argument. He was laying down a sequence of documented, verifiable facts in front of the man whose authority over those facts he had respected for 9 years. Lang looked at the photographs. He looked at Daniel. He said the car had carried a salvage title and had been assessed as having no viable recovery value. He said the evaluation window had been applied at management's discretion. And then he said the sentence that carried the most weight of anything spoken in that room. You are a mechanic, Cross. You are not an evaluator. You are not a decision maker. Are we clear? He did not answer. He went directly to the internal legal office. The attorney on duty was a young woman named Maddox, less than a year with the company. She pulled the McLaren file and went quiet for an uncomfortable stretch. She could not locate a signed owner authorization confirming voluntary surrender by Margaret Doyle. There was a transfer document on file bearing what appeared to be a valid signature, but it had been executed by an intermediary, not by the owner. Daniel asked the name of the intermediary. She turned her screen toward him. Anchor Point Insurance Partners. He wrote it down. He tried to reach Margaret Doyle that afternoon using the contact details in the company system. No answer. A text went unread. An email bounced back undeliverable. He cross-referenced both against the public registration records. The phone number in Hawthorne's system did not match the one on the original registration. The email did not match either. The contact information inside the company's own records had been quietly altered. When, and by whose hand, would require access he did not have. Walter found him at 5:30 and closed the bay door. He had spent the afternoon tracing Crestline Salvage LLC through Delaware's public filings. The company had no physical address. It had been registered 11 weeks earlier. Its sole listed director had no traceable history in the automotive or insurance trades. But the agent contact number on file with the state matched, after 3 hours of methodical work, the personal mobile number of someone connected directly to Hawthorne's management. Walter would not say the name aloud. He needed one more piece confirmed. His face said everything his voice was withholding. Daniel sat with that for 20 minutes. Then he opened the employee portal on his phone and found Section 9C of Hawthorne's transaction policy. In the event of a completed salvage sale below assessed floor value, a current assessment division employee retained the right to match the recorded price and claim title within 72 hours of the sale timestamp. The McLaren had been sold at 5:48 that morning. It was now 5:51 in the evening. He was inside the window by fewer than 2 hours. He looked at his bank balance, $2,140. He looked at the empty concrete. Then he called the administrative office. I want to exercise Section 9C. Vehicle ending 4471. I am matching the recorded price of $300 inside the window. The termination letter was on his workbench the next morning, inside a plain white envelope with his name printed on the front. Effective immediately. Violation of internal transaction protocol. Creation of a conflict of interest. The language was clean and legal and precise. Daniel read it standing in his work jacket, then set it back on the bench. Lang had moved before dawn. The document had been prepared and signed before Daniel arrived. The message required no interpretation. You saw something you were not meant to see. Now you will leave. He did not request a meeting. He did not appeal to anyone. He went to the locker room and packed his tools into a plastic bin, his own torque instruments, a worn McLaren service manual with a cracked spine, and a photograph of Eli that had been taped inside the door for 2 years. He signed the acknowledgement without reading it again. He asked the coordinator one question. Could the vehicle be transported that afternoon? He was told yes. He said thank you. He meant it. Walter walked him to the lot. He held Daniel's hand a moment longer than a handshake requires and kept his voice below the wind. He would keep working. What he had found was enough to pull on, and he intended to pull on it as far as it went. He told to do what he needed to do and not stop doing it. Daniel said, "Watch yourself." Walter nodded, and they separated without another word. That was all that needed saying. The flatbed delivered the McLaren to Daniel's garage on a Wednesday evening, as the last light went flat over the rooftops. He moved his truck to the driveway, backed the car in as far as it would go, and stood looking at it under the white shop lights for a long time without doing anything at all. He was not building up to the work. He was recognizing the full weight of what he had committed to: the car, the debt, the time, the probability of failure. He let it settle into something he could carry without flinching. Then he pulled out his folding stool, opened his laptop, and typed 2 words at the top of a blank page. Day 1. The scope of the work, listed in full, was not encouraging. The front crash structure was destroyed and would have to be sourced and replaced entirely. The hood was not recoverable. Both front fenders were beyond straightening. The headlight assemblies were absent. The windshield needed replacing. The entire airbag system had to be reset, and in several cases physically replaced. The left door needed real metal work to return to factory tolerance. Through authorized channels, the parts for this list alone would exceed $72,000. Daniel had about $1,840 left after the purchase and the transfer fee. He was not a man who panicked. He was a man who understood arithmetic. He closed the cost sheet, opened a new document, and began a different kind of list. Every person he had worked beside in 9 years and what each one could do. Then he closed the laptop. He looked at the ceiling in the dark. Then he opened it again. The first call he made the next morning was to a recovery specialist who had spent 30 years operating in the margins of the exotic trade. The man had no website. He did not need one. Within a day, he had located a McLaren of the same generation, totaled in a highway incident in another state the previous spring. Its front end was pristine. Its left side was destroyed. The mirror image of what Daniel needed. Daniel drove out, inspected every component in person, and returned with a complete front crash structure, both fenders, a hood, and the bumper beam loaded in the bed. $2,900 on a credit card he had not used in over a year. The first week ran in long, unbroken sessions that began before sunrise and ended after midnight. He stripped the front section down to bare carbon. He labeled every component coming off the car and organized each piece in bins along the wall. He prepared the monocoque surfaces for new bodywork. The left door he worked on every evening after 8, using an alignment kit he had bought for an earlier project and never returned. Straightening a door frame on a car like this demands patience, not force. The same calibrated, incremental correction, applied to exactly the right points in exactly the right order, repeated across 5 consecutive evenings. On the 5th evening, the door closed with the sealed precision it had left the factory with. It closed clean. While Daniel's hands were on the car, Walter Briggs was working a parallel line that would have been invisible to anyone not watching for it. He had located Margaret Doyle through the public registration records, her real address, not the altered one, and driven to her home on a Friday afternoon. Margaret Doyle was 60 years old, composed, and genuinely confused. She had not known her car was gone. She had been in the middle of a routine insurance claim after a rear-end collision that turned out worse than it first appeared. She had signed a document she was told was a standard appraisal authorization. Permission for an independent assessor to estimate repair costs on her behalf. She still had her own copy in a folder in her kitchen. Walter photographed every page before he left. In the second week, Daniel turned to the engine. It started on the first key cycle, which confirmed the powertrain was sound. But at idle there was an asymmetrical low-frequency vibration that was not normal. He recognized the signature without hesitation. The left turbocharger. He pulled the unit and found exactly what the sound had told him. A single turbine blade bent fractionally out of tolerance by a pressure event at the moment of impact. The engine itself had never been touched. He ordered a reconditioned turbo from a specialist and used the delivery window to address the entire electrical system. He replaced every deployed airbag module. He reset the engine fuel unit. He verified every sensor in the stability architecture. He resoldered 2 severed connections in the door harness. He slept fewer than 4 hours most nights that week and did not once consider stopping. When the turbo arrived, he installed it in a single 7-hour session and started the engine for the second time. The vibration was gone. That was the night Eli came out to the garage in his socks. He crossed the floor with the focused urgency of a boy on a mission and stopped beside the car. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he reached up and set his small purple toy on the driver's seat, beside the real one, and stepped back to compare them. Under the shop lights, the 2 violets were the same, exactly the same. Daniel crouched down to his level. Eli asked if the car was going to be okay. Daniel said it already was. The boy nodded, entirely satisfied, and picked his toy back up. He did not ask anything else. He already knew. The third week brought the most expensive and most irreversible decision of the project. The paint. That violet did not exist in any standard refinishing formula. It was a proprietary blend, and reconstructing it required either the original specification data or the kind of skill that could rebuild it from a surviving sample. Daniel had preserved a small section of undamaged original paint inside the door jamb throughout the entire job. He took it to a refinisher named Adrian Wells, who had worked on 2 earlier restorations under Daniel's technical oversight. Wells worked from the surviving sample and 4 decades of trained intuition about how light and pigment interact. When the car came out of the booth, the depth of the color in direct light, the way the metallic flake shifted between violet and cobalt depending on the angle, was indistinguishable from the day it had left the line. It matched exactly. The windshield went in on Friday. The headlights went in on Saturday. By the 26th day, the car no longer looked like a project, or a salvage piece, or an argument being constructed. It looked like what it had always been, a machine built to a standard almost nothing else on the public road could match. On the 28th evening, Daniel stood in the garage with the overhead lights at full, and raised his phone and took a single photograph. Then he opened the folder labeled Day 1 and found the image he had taken in the Hawthorne yard in the early morning before anyone else had arrived. He placed the 2 pictures side by side on the screen and looked at them together without speaking. He did not share them anywhere. A single message arrived from Walter Briggs. 4 words. Vivian wants to meet Monday. The conference room on the 15th floor had glass on the south wall and a table long enough for 14. On the Monday morning that Daniel entered it for the first time, there were 6 people present. Vivian Hale at the head of the table, the company's legal counsel to her left, an independent forensic investigator to her right, Walter Briggs along one side, and 1 chair positioned for Daniel. Trevor Lang's chair had not been left empty. It had been removed from the room entirely. Vivian Hale was 36 and had taken the chief executive role after her father retired 4 years earlier. She had restructured the internal processes and built a reputation for directness that was not common in the auction world. She looked at Daniel when he sat down. Before any document was opened, I need to hear it from you first. Everything you know in order from the beginning. Daniel had printed copies of everything. The Day 1 photographs, his original assessment notes, the transaction record with the 548 timestamp and the $300 figure, the documentation on the ownership confirmation gap, the corporate filings on Crestline Salvage. He laid each page on the table in sequence and moved through it chronologically. No editorializing, no accusation. No loaded language that turns facts into arguments before the facts have had a chance to stand on their own. Walter spoke next. He placed two documents on the table, side by side. The authorization form Margaret Doyle had signed, granting an appraiser the right to estimate repair costs, and the title surrender document Hawthorne had received, bearing what appeared to be the same signature. The content of the two forms was completely different. One was a limited cost authorization. The other transferred the car out of her legal ownership. The signatures matched, the documents did not. The room went quiet in the specific way a room goes quiet when the last piece of something confirms what everyone present had already begun to understand but had not yet said aloud. The forensic investigator presented 3 days of findings. Crestline Salvage and Anchor Point Insurance partner shared a registered agent in Delaware. Crestline's sole director had no traceable background in either trade. Beneficial ownership traced through 2 corporate layers to a family member of a senior Hawthorne employee. A direct and undisclosed financial interest in systematically undervalued acquisitions. And the McLaren was not an isolated case. In the 15 months before the investigation, 11 separate vehicles had moved through an identical sequence. A damage classification inconsistent with the technical data on file. A rapid sale to Crestline or an associated entity at a price far below recovery value. A later private resale at figures precisely consistent with what Daniel and his colleagues had originally recommended. The total documented gap across all 11 vehicles exceeded $1,400,000. A Margaret Doyle joined by video. She was calm in the way people are calm when they have decided, before a meeting begins, that the truth is going to come out regardless of how it feels to say it. She confirmed she had never agreed to sell her car. She had signed what she was told was a routine authorization, received it back with a brief assurance that it was standard procedure, and assumed her vehicle was being assessed, not surrendered. She had heard nothing from Hawthorne until Walter Briggs appeared at her door. Her voice did not falter. Her hands, at the edge of the frame, were not entirely still. Vivian Hale made 3 decisions in the room before the meeting closed. Trevor Lang was suspended immediately, with full referral to law enforcement. Margaret Doyle would receive complete legal representation at the company's expense through the entire process of recovering her vehicle and her losses. And Daniel Cross was offered reinstatement, effective immediately, with full back pay for the period of his termination. Daniel looked at the table before responding. Then he looked up and said there was one thing he needed to confirm first. He asked about the legal status of the car, specifically his own title. The counsel reviewed the records and said the original $300 sale was subject to challenge on grounds of fraudulent documentation. But Daniel's exercise of Section 9C had been procedurally valid and executed inside the statutory window. His title was current and uncontested in the absence of a court ruling otherwise. The car was his. Then I want to bring it here. Vivian had proposed something Daniel had not anticipated. Hawthorne's final sale of the month, a curated specialist event attended by collectors, private dealers, and senior figures, was scheduled for the following Friday evening. She asked him to bring the McLaren, not to sell it, to present it, to let it stand in front of the people most qualified to understand what they were looking at and speak for itself. She said the company owed him that floor. Daniel thought about it for a day and said yes. The car arrived on the flatbed 2 hours before the first guests. He drove it off the ramp himself and positioned it at the center of the floor, where the overhead lighting caught the violet at an angle that turned the surface into something between color and light. A senior appraiser had come down from the Northeast for the sale. Conrad Ashby was a man with 4 decades in the trade, whose assessments carried the weight of being consistently right over a very long time. He walked around the car twice without speaking. He crouched at the left door and examined the alignment. He ran his hand along the leading edge of the hood. He looked at the gap between the door sill and the rocker panel, the headlight fitment, the seam lines at the fenders. Then he stood, and without looking away from the car, he asked who had done the work. Daniel said 2 words. I did. Conrad Ashby was quiet for a moment. Then he pressed one finger lightly to the seam at the fender, the way a man touches something he recognizes. He stayed like that for what felt like a long time. I know whose hands these are. The room behind them had gone silent. It was the silence of a number of people, arriving at the same understanding at slightly different speeds. Margaret Doyle had come early. She stood in front of the car for a long time before she touched it. She placed her hand on the front fender, the one sourced from another state, fitted and finished in a residential garage by a man who had lost his income to put it there. She looked at Daniel. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the car, for not walking away." Daniel said he was glad Walter had found her. She said she had almost not answered the door. Eli was there, in a clean shirt, the purple toy in one hand. He looked up at Margaret Doyle and asked if her car was going to be okay now. She said yes. "Your father made sure of it." The boy nodded, and then he said something, plainly, to no one in particular, the way children say true things without knowing they are saying anything at all. "He fixes the things nobody else can." Nobody in the room answered him. There was nothing to add. Vivian Hale addressed the assembled guests in a statement that was brief in length and not brief in what it carried. She said a failure of oversight had let a pattern of undervaluation operate inside her company for more than a year without detection. She said the responsibility for that failure was institutional in origin and began at the level of her own leadership. "It begins with me." She said the words without qualification and without the careful framing that softens accountability into something easier to receive. Then she said Daniel Cross's name. She said this man had no title, no budget, and no guarantee of any outcome. He looked at something every other person in the organization had already written off and decided what he saw in it was worth his complete and undivided effort. He did not wait for permission. He went and did the work. He saw Trevor Lang once more before the week was out. Not by design, in the parking structure beneath the building, while Lang was loading personal items into the trunk of his car. Lang saw Daniel and stopped. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Lang said something he had probably rehearsed as a dismissal, but which arrived carrying a different weight than he intended. "You think you accomplished something, Cross? You're a mechanic." Daniel stopped walking. He stood there a few seconds with his hands in his jacket pockets. "You're right," he said. "I'm a mechanic. I know what's worth fixing and what's not." He turned and walked to the elevator and did not look back. That was the whole of their final exchange. It required nothing more. 3 weeks later, Daniel moved into a new office, a glass-walled room overlooking the service floor, positioned at his own request so the assessment bay was visible from his desk at all times. The role was newly created. Director of Vehicle Assessment, with independent authority to set and protect the floors across all incoming inventory, reporting to Vivian's office directly. Walter Briggs retired on the date he had been counting toward for years, but agreed to consult part-time for 6 months, 3 mornings a week, with the unhurried patience of a man who understands that leaving something well matters as much as building it well. The legal process around Margaret Doyle's car closed faster than the attorneys expected. The court found the original surrender document invalid on grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation and voided the $300 sale entirely. Margaret was confirmed as the legal owner of record and received full compensation for the original collision. She took the McLaren to an authorized dealer for an independent assessment. The figure they gave her was $188,000. She was not selling it. Not because of the money, she wrote. On a Thursday evening, Daniel arrived home, exactly when the note on the refrigerator said he would. Eli was at the kitchen table with a drawing in front of him, the purple toy sitting at the edge of the page. On the corner of Daniel's new desk downtown, an identical patch of violet now caught the window light. The small toy turned to face the floor he watched over. At home, without looking up, the boy asked what his father had been so busy with all that month. Daniel sat down across from him. "Fixing a car," he said. Eli asked if it was special. Daniel thought about it the way a man thinks about a question that deserves a real answer rather than a convenient one. Not because it was expensive, he said, because nobody thought it was worth fixing anymore. Looking back, the thing that changed everything was not the car. It was a single decision to stop and to look at something properly, the way the rest of the world had not. The difference between value and worthlessness is often nothing more than that. The willingness to stop and look at the thing everyone else has walked past. Authority exercised without the willingness to listen is not strength. It is a specific and very costly kind of blindness, and some things cannot really be taken. They can be buried under wrong names and bad paperwork. But they stay where they are, underneath, patient, waiting for the one person who still knows how to call them back. If you had been in his position, would you have walked away or bet everything on what you saw? Tell me in the comments. Our team works hard to create stories dramatic enough to entertain, but meaningful enough to leave a lasting message. Everything in this video is completely fictional and was created only to share meaningful lessons through an entertaining story. We hope it encourages you to value what is real, to look past the surface of the people around you, and to never let a first impression write the final word on anyone's worth.